Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental in ecology.
Yes, something that sounds maybe a little dry, but it's actually critical.
It is. It's about the words we use, specifically around alien plants. Why can't scientists seem to agree on what invasive actually means?
It's been a real mess, frankly,
Mhm.
and that's why our source for this deep dive is so important. It's the paper Naturalization and Invasion of Alien Plants, Concepts and Definitions, led by David M. Richardson and a whole team of international experts back in 2000.
Okay, Richardson et al. And what was their goal, their mission?
Well, they put it plainly. There was much confusion around the terms naturalized and invasive, just loads of it.
And that confusion wasn't just academic hair splitting, was it?
Not at all. It was actively preventing researchers from forming robust generalizations in invasion ecology.
Yeah.
Finding the patterns.
Right. Because if you, the listener, are reading two different studies on invasive plants, maybe one from Europe, one from Australia.
You'd assume they're talking about the same phenomenon. But often, they weren't. The definitions were all over the place.
And that has real-world consequences.
Huge ones. This isn't just about theory. When the science is confused, the policy gets confused. Management priorities get confused.
So how do you decide where to put your resources? Are you fighting a plant that's just sort of settled in,
Yeah.
or one that's actively causing major problems?
Exactly. That lack of clear, agreed-upon terms really hampers objective decision-making, big time.
Okay, let's dig into that confusion itself. The authors point out something interesting about the word invasion.
Yeah, it's loaded, isn't it? It brings up all these very human ideas, aggression, assault.
Strike, attack, like it's inherently bad.
Right. There's often a negative value judgment baked right into the term itself before you even know anything about the plant's actual impact.
So how did Richardson's team actually figure out how bad this confusion was? What was their method?
They did a massive survey, really comprehensive. They looked at definitions in dictionaries, encyclopedias, key textbooks.
Standard places?
The standard places, yes. But then they went deeper. They analyzed 157 original research papers, mostly on woody plants, from this database called TreeCD.
Okay.
And they also looked at lots of regional and national floras, so a really wide net.
That sounds like a huge amount of work. So what did they find when they looked at how researchers were actually using these terms? Let's start with naturalized. Was there any consensus?
Well, this is where it gets pretty concerning. They found that only 23% of the papers they looked at used what you might call the conventional meaning.
Which is?
Basically a plant population that's self-sustaining. It reproduces on its own, persists over time, without humans having to keep reintroducing it.
Okay, only 23%. Less than a quarter agreed on that basic definition.
Yeah, it kind of stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It
How can you compare studies if the baseline term is used so inconsistently?
makes generalization almost impossible. What else did they find?
Well, this is maybe even more worrying. A full 29%, almost a third, used naturalized as direct synonym for invasive.
Wow, so they just collapsed the two ideas together. No distinction between simply being established and actually spreading aggressively?
None at all in those papers.
Yeah.
They treated them as the same thing.
Okay.
And then another 25% used naturalized even more broadly,
Hmm.
basically just as a synonym for alien or non-native. So any plant that wasn't originally from there.
Good grief. So if you add that up, 23% using it conventionally, 29% conflating it with invasive, 25% just meaning alien.
You see that the vast majority of the literature wasn't using the term consistently at all. There was just no shared understanding.
That paints a pretty chaotic picture. It really highlights why they felt the need to step in and propose a standardized system.
Absolutely. They argued that you couldn't build robust ecological theory on such shaky linguistic foundations. You can't figure out what drives invasion if you can't even agree on what invasion is.
So what did they propose instead? How did they try to clean this up?
They went back to a fairly old concept, actually. The idea that the whole process, from arrival to spread, can be seen as a plant overcoming a series of hurdles or barriers. This goes back to Kendall in the 1820s.
Barriers. Okay, that sounds intuitive, like stages in a process.
Exactly. It creates a clear pathway. The first step is introduction, overcoming barrier A.
And that just means?
That just means humans have moved the plant, or its seeds or propioles, across a major geographical barrier. Something significant, like an ocean, or even just a long-distance overland. They suggest around 100 kilometers as a rough guide for major.
Okay, so it's arrived somewhere new, thanks to us. But lots of introduced plants don't actually make it, do they? They just sort of appear and vanish.
Right, and the paper gives those a name. Casual alien plants. Think of them as like waifs or transients.
So they might sprout, maybe even flower once or twice.
Yeah, they might flourish for a bit, maybe even reproduce occasionally. But crucially, they don't establish self-replacing populations that persist year after year. They basically depend on humans accidentally bringing them in again and again.
What barriers are they failing to cross?
They fail barrier B, which is basically surviving the local environmental conditions, both abiotic like climate and soil, and biotic like pests or competition.
Yeah.
And they fail barrier C, which is achieving regular, successful reproduction.
Okay. So if a plant does manage to survive and reproduce reliably generation after generation without our help, what's the next stage?
That's when it becomes naturalized. It's overcome barriers B and C. It's established. It's self-sufficient.
And at this stage, is it spreading much?
Usually not dramatically.
Yeah.
The key thing about naturalized populations, as defined here, is that the offspring are typically found quite close to the parent plants. It's holding its ground, reproducing successfully, but not yet making big leaps across the landscape.
Right. It's settled in, but it's staying local, more or less.
Exactly. It's persistent, but geographically contained.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Because the next step is the controversial one, becoming invasive. How did Richardson and his team define that crucial transition?
This is really the heart of their proposal. They defined an invasive plant very specifically. It's a naturalized plant, so it's already established,
Okay.
that produces reproductive offspring at considerable distances from the parent plants.
Considerable distances. That sounds a bit vague.
Well, they knew it needed to be objective, measurable, so they proposed actual quantitative thresholds. This was quite novel.
Ah, okay. Numbers. What are they?
For plants that spread by seeds or other bits that travel, like spores or fragments, the threshold they proposed is spreading more than 100 meters in less than 50 years.
Right, 100 meters in 50 years. That's specific. So if you track a naturalized population and its descendants are popping up over 100 meters away within half a century, boom, it's invasive.
According to this definition, yes. And it's purely about the spread, the demographics, not about whether it's causing harm.
What about plants that spread differently, like through roots or runners underground?
Good point. For plants spreading vegetatively, things like rhizomes, stolons, creeping stems, the proposed metric is different. It's spreading more than 6 meters in 3 years.
Okay, 6 meters in 3 years for the vegetative spreaders. Again, a clear, measurable criterion.
Exactly. The whole point was to tie the definition of invasive strictly to this measurable demographic leap in distribution, its ability to move across the landscape rapidly.
And this is the really key conceptual shift, isn't it? They deliberately separated the idea of spread from the idea of impact.
Precisely. This is probably the most novel and potentially impactful part of the paper, especially for management. They argued that invasive should only refer to this biogeographic or demographic status, its ability to spread widely and quickly.
So under their definition, a plant could be invasive even if it's seemingly harmless.
Yes, the term invasive itself becomes neutral regarding impact. It simply describes a successful spreader.
Which is a huge change from how many people, including policymakers, often use the word.
A massive change. It strips away that inherent negative connotation we talked about earlier.
Okay, so if invasive just means good at spreading, what words did they suggest we use for the plants that are actually causing problems, the ones that harm ecosystems or economies?
They suggested falling back on older, perhaps clearer terms, like pests or weeds.
Right. Good old weeds.
Exactly. They estimate that a pretty large chunk of invasive species, maybe 50% to 80%, probably do fall into this category. They spread widely, and they cause some kind of identifiable harm.
So most invaders are pests or weeds by other definitions, but they wanted to keep the definition of invasive separate.
Yes. Keep the concepts distinct. Spread is one thing, impact is another.
But then they identify an even smaller, more problematic group, the real ecosystem wreckers.
Ah, yes. The transformers. This is a crucial category.
What makes a plant a transformer?
These are the invasive species that go beyond just being pests. They actively change the character, condition, form, or nature of ecosystems over a substantial area. They fundamentally alter how the ecosystem works.
They're not just living in the ecosystem, they're rewriting its rules.
That's a great way to put it. And they estimate this is a small subset, maybe only 10% or so, of invasive species qualify as transformers. But their impact is disproportionately huge.
Can you give some examples from the paper of how these transformers actually will transform things?
Sure. They mention excessive users of resources. The classic example is tamarisk species, salt cedar, in arid regions.
Right, I've heard about tamarix, drinks a lot of water.
A lot of water. It can lower the water table so dramatically that native plants with shallower roots just can't survive anymore. It fundamentally changes the hydrology. That's transformation.
Okay, that's a clear mechanism. What else?
They talk about fire promoters,
Yeah.
like Melaleuca quinquenervia in Florida. It invades, increases the amount of flammable material, and leads to hotter, more frequent fires.
Which native species might not be adapted to?
Exactly. It changes the whole fire regime, favoring itself and pushing out natives. Another example is litter accumulators, like some eucalyptus species when planted outside Australia. They can produce so much leaf litter that it smothers native understory plants and changes soil chemistry and nutrient cycling.
So, transformer species really alter the fundamental physical or biological processes of an ecosystem.
Over a significant area, yes. That's the key.
And the separation, invasive spread, pest weed, harm, transformer, ecosystem change is vital because it allows us to study different things, right? The biology of spread versus the biology of impact.
Absolutely. And they underline this point by talking about benign invaders.
Benign invaders, that sounds like an oxymoron based on the old usage.
It does, but it fits their definition perfectly. They give the example of Araprecox, a type of grass. It apparently spreads very effectively. It meets the 100 meters in 50 years threshold. So by their definition, it is invasive.
Right.
But its actual impact on the environment or economy seems to be negligible. It's below the level we can really detect or worry about practically.
I see. So if your definition of invasive required harm, you'd ignore species like Araprecox.
You would. And then you'd miss out on studying why it's so successful at spreading, even if it isn't causing obvious problems. You lose data points for understanding the mechanisms of spread itself.
That makes a lot of sense for research. But you mentioned policy earlier. This purely demographic definition of invasive must clash with how governments or conservation bodies use the term, right?
It definitely does. The paper acknowledges this tension. Many official bodies, like the IUCN or, say, the U.S. government under various executive orders, tend to define invasive species based on the harm they cause or are likely to cause.
Why do they do that?
Well, it often simplifies things from a management perspective. If it meets the official definition of invasive, which includes harm, then action is warranted. It links definition directly to response.
Whereas under the Richardson definition, just being invasive doesn't automatically mean you need to control it. You'd need to determine if it's also a weed, a pest, or critically, a transformer.
Exactly. The scientific definition is neutral on impact. The policy definitions often aren't. So scientists using this framework might talk about an invasive weed or an invasive transformer when communicating with managers.
So it requires an extra layer of description in practice.
It does. The authors basically encourage scientists to be precise in their research using this demographic definition, but to be aware of, and maybe adapt for, the policy context where invasive often implies harm.
Okay. Now, while this framework seems really useful for clarity, did the authors acknowledge any sort of fuzziness around the edges? Is it really as clear-cut as barrier A, B, C, D?
No, they were realistic about it. They explicitly state that the progression, especially between being naturalized and becoming invasive, is really a continuum. It's not like flicking a switch.
It's not always neat steps.
Not always. And they also acknowledge that those quantitative metrics, the 100 meters in 50 years, the 6 meters in 3 years, while really useful for standardizing research and allowing comparisons, they are, in their words, somewhat arbitrary.
Meaning they're practical guidelines, not laws of nature.
Precisely. They had to draw a line somewhere to make it operational, but they recognized it wasn't magic. It's a tool for consistency.
Did they offer any other advice for clarity? Maybe about related terms?
Yes, one useful point. They suggested that ecologists, studying how native species move into new areas like trees spreading into an abandoned field, which is natural succession, should use the term colonization.
Reserve invasions specifically for the non-native context.
Exactly. Keep invasion focused on the dynamics of alien species crossing those biogeographic barriers to avoid muddying the waters again.
So, wrapping this part up, the main goal here was simplicity and clarity, a framework everyone could hopefully use.
Yes. A simple, objective scheme based on these barriers, particularly the demographic barrier for invasion, that could be widely applied. The hope was that by standardizing the language, the field could finally move past arguing about definitions.
And get on with the real work of figuring out why some species succeed so spectacularly.
Exactly. Focus on the drivers of invasion success now that we have a clearer idea of what success means in this context.
Okay, so the absolute core takeaway here is that jump from naturalized to invasive in this framework is defined purely by spread. By hitting that measurable threshold, like the 100 meters, impact is a separate question.
That's the essence of it. Whether the plant turns out to be a problem weed, a devastating transformer, or just a benign traveler, the label invasive simply marks that demographic achievement of rapid, widespread dispersal.
It really forces you to think differently. And considering those numbers, again, maybe 50 to 80% of invaders do cause some harm, but maybe only 10% are true transformers. It leads to a fascinating final thought for you, the listener. If we really adopt this clear separation between spread, invasion, and impact, being a pest or especially a transformer, how should that change how we allocate our limited resources for management? Do we chase after everything that meets the 100-meter rule? Or do we focus almost exclusively on identifying and stopping those top 10%, the transformers? How much ecosystem change does it take before we classify something as a true transformer, worthy of potentially massive intervention? It's a question of scale and priority, isn't it?